Always good to be chatting with the New South Wales Farmers President, James Jackson. How are you today, James?
Oh, not too bad. Wet feet, but getting through there, getting on.
Yeah, it is wet, actually. We've picked up some commentary about how there's some challenges for farmers indeed when it comes to just getting, I guess, whether it's sowing or ripping or getting, the fertilisers onto the paddock in New South Wales. It's just too wet in places.
Absolutely. A lot of canola has been planted from the air, and this latest East Coast low, if you like, has caused a lot of those fields to be inundated, and we've lost another canola crop. So, yes, while it's very good having a moisture profile to plant on, it's been very, very challenging actually to get a crop in. So, yeah, a lot of people have lost a lot of money on this, planting canola from the air or even wheat from the air, because haven't been able to get the rigs on the ground. Just too wet. But having said that, the planting window is starting to close for some of those crops, and whether we'll have to pivot to another crop to use that moisture. That's a part of farming, isn't it? We've got to do what is possible, if you like.
Yeah, farmers are very good at innovating and adapting, sometimes scaling up if they have to. But one thing that maybe isn't within their control is the availability of labour. This has been a constant refrain since the pandemic and related restrictions sort of emerged. And do we need to sort of ease up perhaps on the regulations to get these workers, skilled and unskilled, into the farming sector?
Absolutely. We've certainly got to have a concerted effort on getting, the overseas labour component back into the country. The backpackers, the 462 visas, those education visas, the Pacific Islander programs. This current government is essentially they've done some fiddled around with the Pacific Islander program. And I think some of those initiatives are actually quite positive about lengthening the visas out to 4 years and allowing family to come across here and to even have a pathway to citizenship, included in those. That's a part of their sort of Pacific package. But they've got a problem with, the ag visa piece. And I think we need all the levers, if you like, to get these positions filled in agriculture, because there is a huge lost opportunity to the economy now due to not having labour, and it's right across the economy, but it's absolutely critical in the ag sector. And these jobs, they're not all picking fruit. While picking fruit and harvesting vegetables are important, and we don't want those vegetables rotting in the field. There's things like drone technicians and engineers and, right across the board, agronomists, vets. We're short of labour right across the board, and a lot of these jobs are quite sophisticated, highly paid jobs.
And when you're talking about those sorts of challenges and the diverse opportunities in agriculture, I gather you're saying there's opportunities for the younger generation and even those looking to retrain or reskill that are living in Australia to take up a career in agriculture.
Well, you're dead right. I mean, the beauty of rural Australia is that a lot of your costs are cheaper. Your golf club membership and, your housing costs are a lot cheaper in rural Australia, rural New South Wales. So, if you're there thinking about, a tree change or a sea change or whatever, I think agriculture is a dynamic, growing industry. It's sustainable. It's got it ticks a lot of the boxes for a lot of people, and I would encourage people to seriously consider agriculture, whether they be new graduates from agronomy or veterinary science or whatever, or indeed people re-pivoting in the economy. We see 500,000 job vacancies in Australia at the moment, 500,000. And there's 500,000 people taking unemployment benefits as well. So if you could sort of slot them straight into the jobs, retrain them, slot them into the jobs, that would be one solution. But the other solution is certainly get some people from overseas, get these people moving internationally again. It's a problem right around the world. But we've got to compete against a lot of other destinations for those overseas people, and we've got to make sure that training and repurposing, if you like, our workforce in Australia is actually doable. And yeah, rural Australia is a real opportunity.
When we had the debates about electricity recently, there was this term bill shock that the media came up with, but it's now broccoli and lettuce shock, isn't it? You know, the price that people are having to pay per kilo for that stuff, how much is that broccoli shock attributable to the lack of labour to pick the stuff in the first place?
Well, it's certainly contributing. I think the price of some of our leafy vegetables is the perfect storm, if you like. It's an unfortunate analogy, but this storm we've had on the east coast at the moment that will actually put a lot of production or another planting, if you like, of horticultural or vegetable crops, along those floodplains. It'll put them underwater and put the supply, if you like, back by another 6 or 8 weeks to things like lettuces. So, yes, it certainly is a problem. But labour, people are not planting the crop to start with because they're not confident that they'll actually have anybody to harvest it. And a lot of the costs are up front. We haven't got somebody to harvest it, so you don't actually plant the crop. So guess what? Some of the food inflation that we're seeing, and some components of the food inflation we're seeing at the moment is due to labour shortages. And that is largely controllable by the government, especially opening up and encouraging those international people into the country. Now, the other component, if you like, to this, which is not well understood, is that the profitability of these crops is very, very tight. The margins in growing, things like lettuce is incredibly tight, and that is because we've got a supermarket duopoly, if you like, in this country. Nowhere else in the Western world is there such a concentration in retailing power, if you like, in fresh food and vegetables. And a part of this is due to lack of investment in horticulture because there simply hasn't been the margins and there hasn't been the diversity of the outlets, if you like, for selling this stuff on a domestic market. So the ACCC and our competition laws have got some part to play in the current inflation or the current food inflation, if you like. The chickens are coming home to roost, if you like. It's one of the reasons why we've got a shortage of eggs in the country at the moment. It's one of the reasons why lettuce is $12 a head. Is because of that competition phase.
Yeah, important to keep tracking that, and we will hear about competition in the across the farming sector and as it relates to supermarkets. I want to lean on your expertise as a veterinarian now just about the foot and mouth disease situation. The indications we're seeing with this concern of the outbreak at Bali is that it is highly transmissible, can be carried even on clothing from travellers. Is that correct? It's a pretty easily movable disease?
Yes, it is. That's the answer. It's very highly contagious, and although humans can actually get it, there are recorded cases of humans actually getting some skin irritations and whatnot, but normally they don't get it, and it's a disease of ungulates or cloven-hoofed animals, generally speaking. But it can be carried on product, in sausage and stuff like this from Eastern Europe, and it can be bought in on food products, on clothing.
Was it you that said previously it could carry on the fog across the English Channel? Was that?
It did. It did. There's a famous case. Very highly humid conditions. It'll travel tens of kilometres, if not hundreds of kilometres. It'll just carry on water droplets, and it did carry across the English Channel on one occasion. So, yes, it is. It's highly contagious. That doesn't mean it always does that. It usually involves moving animals around, that moves it around. Moving animals around or a feed truck that goes around, so that's usually the case as to how it's transmitted, but it can be transmitted on water vapour, which is pretty scary stuff. If we thought equine influenza was highly contagious, where animals, who weren't directly in contact did contract it, in the actual spread of it, this is actually 2 or 3 times more infectious than equine influenza. So, yeah, we've just got to be very careful, and we've got to make sure that, travellers coming back from Indonesia, if you could avoid going near a farm or farm animals for a fortnight after you come back, that would be very, very responsible thing to do. So, clean your boots, if you've been trekking around Bali. Make sure that you don't bring any product back that could actually contain it. And just avoid farm animals in Australia for a fortnight after you come back. If you could do that, you'd be adding to the response. That would decrease the risk a little bit, and if we all sort of chip in, I think we can avoid getting this one. I'm very worried about lumpy skin, which is there's a virus up in Indonesia called lumpy skin with cattle, and it can actually come across with mosquitoes, vectors, and that probably could potentially come in from Indonesia across into northern Australia. Foot and mouth usually actually will be carried through the airport or through the ports.
And I guess as we've seen with Japanese encephalitis, which has got a lot further south than it has in the past, usually it's a northern Australian tropical situation, demonstrates that you can't be certain if it's airborne via mosquito that it's only going to stay in the north.
Well, that's right. I mean, and Japanese encephalitis is a classic case where the range of the vectors, if you like, is extended because of climate variability, if you like. And we've seen that with blue tongue as well, the benign strains of blue tongue that we got in this country. And before, those vectors wouldn't go near Victoria, too cold, but we see outbreaks of blue tongue in Victoria now. So it just does tell you that the range of the vectors can sometimes, change, if you like, if environmental conditions change. Japanese encephalitis and blue tongue are 2 case studies, and lumpy skin could be the same story. It's showing up, if you like, some of the weaknesses in our biosecurity, in our systems, if you like, to stop these sort of diseases coming into the country. Australia is blessed by being an island, and that helps. And we have got reasonable sort of biosecurity arrangements in place. But there's a lot of people who come from Indonesia or Nepal and these places which have got diseases we don't want. Now, we don't want to stop the two-way tourist traffic because that's actually very important for other sectors of the economy, but we've got to make sure that people coming into the country or containers coming into the country or ships coming into the country where these Varroa Mite essentially came in on a ship coming into Newcastle, we've got to make sure that they don't actually have these diseases on board, because it is going to cost the economy large amounts of money. So, yes, it is showing up. Our surveillance is under the money. Our response capacity is under the money. Some of our traceability systems are probably need upgrading. So we've just got to make sure that the federal government, the state government, and the local government all work together to make sure that the risk is minimised.
Yeah, well, we've heard a lot of commentary in the last sort of few years, particularly from the former federal government, trying to invest in biosecurity. Now there's this push to have this cost recovery model, as former Minister David Littleproud called it, or really, in effect, a tax on imports. When you look at the Varroa Mite, for instance, we've had concerns expressed by apiarists that bees could be bringing that in through shipping containers, and now we've got a detection in Narrabri, which, as you say, may be an indicator that our systems are pretty good at detecting. Are you optimistic that we can actually contain Varroa Mite? Because no country, once it's got in, has succeeded in stopping it getting into the endemic nature in the country.
Well, that's right. It's a tricky one, and this outbreak seems to have got a little bit further than some of the others. We have had Varroa Mite in the country before, and we've got on top of it. We've eradicated it, so we're still in the eradication mode, if you like. It does appear that a Varroa Mite has got out past those sentinel hives around the Newcastle port. Now, the fact that our hives our sentinel or our surveillance arrangements around our ports have failed to detect it in a timely manner and been able to actually stop it and contain it to around the ports, I think it does say something about our surveillance systems are not quite up to scratch.
Well, just on that, the Department of Primary Industries have indicated they want people to report if they've bought anything from that area in the last 12 months. So there's an implicit acknowledgement, isn't there, in that statement that they may be worried their sentinels haven't picked it up?
Yes, yeah. In essence, yes. And they're being very careful, very cautious, and rightly so. You've got to make sure that you get this standstill right. You enforce it so the hives aren't moved around, and we can get on top of it, understand where the mite is as quickly as possible, and get on top of it as quickly as possible. We have got a crisis coming up with our pollination of our almond crops. Now, those bees usually go into those almond orchards in July, this month. So it is absolutely critical we get on top of this. Now, this could have ramifications beyond the honeybee industry in itself, because honeybees are used for pollination services for some of our horticultural crops. So that the cost of that, or lack of pollination, or a poor seed set, if you like, in the almonds, could be significant. And there's other crops like avocado that require honeybees as well. So yes, it is potentially quite devastating.
Well, David Littleproud, the Nationals leader, told us earlier this week on Flow, he estimates in annual production value about $14 billion is underpinned by bee pollination. So that's pretty big when you look at a national target. We were aiming for $100 billion by 2030 in terms of overall production.
Yeah, well, it tells you, that sort of figure tells you just how integrated and how susceptible, our production systems are to some of these incursions. I mean, he is dead right. I mean, when it got into New Zealand, some of their pastures stopped producing because the lack of pollination in their pastures. I mean, it is extraordinary how dependent we are on these European honeybees, because they are such a prodigious pollinator. Now, we don't know whether that experience will be the same in Australia. We're just not sure exactly how much of that pollination is done by other insects, native bees, those sort of things. So it will be interesting, and I hope we don't have to find out, and I hope we can get on top of this Varroa Mite outbreak as quickly as possible.
Probably, if there's an upside to it all, it's probably that no longer are we talking about biosecurity in hypothetical terms. The threats are very real, and now they're much closer to the public mind. James Jackson from the New South Wales Farmers, thanks so much for joining us.
No problems.